So you're posting 3 times a day, and somehow you still have 0 customers. Which is weird, because the internet promised you that consistency is key. And you've been very consistent at being ignored. Turns out, creating more content isn't the problem you think it is. It's actually the problem you're creating. Here's what nobody tells you when you're starting out. Posting more doesn't equal getting more clients. It just equals posting more. Which sounds obvious when I say it like that, but apparently we all needed to waste 6 months making reels before we figured it out. The thing is, social media has convinced us that visibility equals revenue. And technically, that's true, if you're selling ad space. But if you're trying to get your first 5 customers, visibility is just people seeing you exist, which is nice for your ego, but terrible for your bank account. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people scroll past your content the same way they scroll past everything else, quickly and with 0 intention of ever buying anything. So when you're making content for the algorithm, you're basically just feeding a machine that doesn't pay you, which is fine if you enjoy performance art. But if you're trying to run a business, it's just unpaid labor with extra steps. So if posting more content doesn't work, what does? Conversations. I know. That sounds like something a LinkedIn motivational post would say right before telling you to add value. But here's the thing. Clients don't come from content. They come from conversations that happen because of content. And the difference is huge. Content is you talking at people. Conversations are you talking with people. And only one of those ends with someone paying you money. So instead of spending 4 hours editing a video that 200 people will watch and 0 people will respond to, you could spend that same 4 hours having actual conversations with people who might actually need what you're selling, which is less sexy than going viral, but significantly more profitable. Now, I'm not saying you should stop posting entirely. That would be the smart move, but it's also not realistic because we're all addicted to the dopamine hit of notifications. So instead, let's talk about the minimum effective dose, which is just a fancy way of saying, what's the least amount of content you can post while still starting conversations? And the answer is usually way less than you think. You don't need to post every day. You don't need to be on every platform. You don't even need to be good on camera, which is great news for those of us who look like we're being held hostage every time we hit record. What you need is one piece of content that makes someone think, this person might actually be able to help me. And then you need to follow up. Because here's where most people mess up. They post something, get a like or a comment, and then nothing. They just move on to making the next post, which is like planting seeds and then immediately walking away to plant more seeds instead of, watering the ones you already planted. So here's what I'd do if I were starting over and needed 5 customers fast. I'd post one thing, doesn't matter what, as long as it's related to the problem I solve. Then I'd look at who engaged with it, not just liked it, actually engaged, commented, shared, saved, whatever. And then I'd message them, not with a pitch, just with a conversation. Something like, hey, saw you liked my post about topic. Are you dealing with specific problem right now? And then I'd shut up and let them talk. Because here's the secret. People who engage with your content are already interested. They're just waiting for you to start an actual conversation instead of shouting into the void. And if you can have a real conversation with someone who's already interested, you're about 80% of the way to a sale. The other 20% is just not being weird about it. Now, if you want to see exactly how I'd build this into a system that actually pays you to get new customers, not just likes and comments, but actual paying customers, I'm doing a free web class this Thursday at 7 p.m. Central. I'll walk through the whole thing step by step. It's free, links in the description. Anyway, now, if this approach feels uncomfortable, that's because it is. We've been trained to think that selling happens through funnels and automations and 47-step email sequences. So the idea of just talking to people, feels almost too simple, like we're supposed to be doing something more complicated. But that's just because the internet has convinced us that business is supposed to be scalable from day one, which is a great way to sell courses about scaling, but a terrible way to get your first 5 customers. Because when you're starting out, you don't need scale, you need proof that someone will actually pay you. And the fastest way to get that proof is to talk to people until someone says yes, which is boring and manual and doesn't make for a good Instagram caption. But it works. So what kind of content should you be making if you're not trying to feed the algorithm? Simple. Content that starts conversations, which usually means one of 3 things. 1. You share a specific problem you solved for someone. Not a vague "I help businesses grow" post. A specific "I helped this client do this exact thing" story. 2. You ask a question that people actually want to answer. Not, "What's your biggest struggle?" Because nobody answers that. Something specific like, "Do you hate writing emails as much as I do? Or is that just me?" 3. You share something you learned the hard way. People love watching other people make mistakes as long as there's a lesson at the end. Notice what all 3 of these have in common? They're not trying to reach everyone, they're trying to start a conversation with someone, and that's the whole point. Here's the funny thing about posting less. You usually end up with more results. Not because the algorithm rewards you for taking a break, it definitely doesn't, but because when you stop spending all your time making content, you actually have time to talk to people. And talking to people is how you get customers. I know that's not the answer you wanted. You probably wanted me to give you a content calendar and a posting schedule and some kind of hack that makes this easier. But the truth is, there is no hack. There's just make something that resonates with someone, then talk to that someone, then help them if you can. And if you do that 5 times, you'll have 5 customers, which won't make you rich, but it will make you not broke. And honestly, that's a pretty good place to start. So to recap, creating more content isn't killing your growth because you're bad at content. It's killing your growth because you're spending all your time creating instead of connecting. And connection is what actually turns strangers into customers. So if you're serious about getting your first 5 clients, here's what I'd do. Post one thing this week. See who engages. Message them. Have a conversation. Help them if you can. Repeat until you have 5 customers. Then, and only then, worry about scaling, automating, and all the other stuff that sounds impressive but doesn't matter when you're starting out. Because the truth is, you don't need to be everywhere. You just need to be useful to someone. And if you can do that 5 times, you're already ahead of most people who are still trying to figure out the perfect posting schedule. Anyway, that's how I'd get my first 5 customers if I had to start over. And if that doesn't work, you can always just post more content and hope for the best, which, based on how well it's been working so far, should get you results in approximately never.